You clicked for Nero, madness, music, and murder, and in the next few minutes, we're diving into the shocking reign of Rome's most infamous emperor. Get ready to uncover the truth behind the myths of the man who supposedly played while Rome burned. From a golden boy with artistic dreams to a feared tyrant, Nero's transformation shook the Roman world. We're sifting through the sensational accounts of Suetonius's lives of the 12 Caesars to reveal the full story. Not just the fires, but the twisted genius, the calculated cruelties, and the insatiable ego. Did Nero actually start the Great Fire of Rome to clear land for his golden palace, or was he a scapegoat? Was his obsession with music and performance a sign of genius, or profound madness? And what about the brutal murders of his own family? We'll expose the intricate web of conspiracy, art, and unspeakable violence that defined his rule, giving you a portrait of Nero far more complex and terrifying than any legend. Suetonius's access to court secrets provides an unparalleled, unfiltered look. If you're ready for a deep dive into one of history's most compelling and controversial figures, you're in for an epic tale. Stick around as we unravel the madness, music, and murder of Emperor Nero. Before we begin, please hit that like button, tell us your thoughts on Nero in the comments, and subscribe for more untold stories from ancient Rome. Nero Claudius Caesar. Two celebrated families, the Calvini and the Enobarbi, both trace their origins to the Domitii. The Enobarbi take their name and lineage from a man named Lucius Domitius. There is a notable story about him. As he was returning from the countryside to Rome, he encountered two young men of noble appearance who asked him to announce a victory that had not yet been officially reported in the city. To show they were more than mere mortals, they touched his cheeks, turning his black hair to a bright color like brass. This distinguishing mark passed down to his descendants, who were known for their red beards. This family achieved the honor of 7 consulships, 1 triumph, and 2 censorships. Once admitted to the patrician class, they consistently used the same family name, with only the first names Gaius and Lucius, though these were used irregularly. Sometimes, 3 successive Enobarbi carried the name Lucius. Then the next 3 took Gaius, alternating over time. It seems fitting to recount parts of this family's history to highlight how Nero, a descendant, fell far from the noble qualities of his ancestors, retaining only their faults. Starting long ago, Nero's great-grandfather's grandfather, Gaius Domitius, as tribune of the people, was upset that the high priests elected someone else instead of his father. He successfully shifted the election power from the priests to the people. As consul, he defeated the Allobroges and Arverni and toured the province riding an elephant with soldiers in a triumphal display. The orator Licinius Crassus said of him, "It is no wonder he had a brazen beard, with a face of iron and a heart of lead." His son, during his praetorship, accused Gaius Caesar, the consul, of mismanagement against omens and laws. Later, during his own consulship, he tried to remove Caesar's military command, and through political intrigue was made his successor. He was captured early in the civil war but later freed and went to support the siege of Marseilles. However, he suddenly abandoned the city and died in the Battle of Pharsalia. He was known for his inconstancy and sullen nature. Desperate, he tried to poison himself but was terrified by death and reversed the attempt. When Pompey considered how to treat neutrals during the conflict, this man alone advised treating them as enemies. He left a son, the finest in the family. Though innocent, he was condemned by law alongside others involved in Caesar's death. He then joined Brutus and Cassius, his relatives, and after their defeat, controlled and grew their naval forces. Eventually, he surrendered to Mark Antony, who owed him considerable favor. Unlike others condemned by that law, he was restored to his country and held the highest offices. In the next civil war, he served as Antony's lieutenant. When offered chief command by Antony's disgruntled supporters, he hesitated due to illness and then sided with Augustus. He died soon after amid rumors that he switched sides because he longed to be with his mistress. This son had a son called Domitius, noted for purchasing family property left by Augustus in his name. Famous in youth for his skill in chariot racing, he later earned triumphal honors in German wars. Yet he was arrogant, extravagant, and cruel, once forcing a censor to give way to him, making knights and women act on stage, and organizing brutal wild beast hunts and gladiator games in Rome. Augustus privately rebuked him, but later had to publicly restrain him. Domitius sired Nero's father, a man infamous for cruelty and crime. While serving Caius Caesar in the East, he killed a freedman for refusing a drinking order. Banished from Caesar's company, he did not improve. Near the Appian Way, he deliberately ran over a boy with his chariot and once blinded a Roman knight in the Forum over a quarrel. Fraudulent in business and corrupt in games, he was eventually prosecuted for treason and scandal but died of illness, leaving behind Nero. Nero was born in Antium, shortly after Tiberius's death. His birth coincided with sunrise, a fact that led some to fear for his future. His father prophesied ill of him, saying nothing good could come from him and Agrippina. Another ominous sign occurred at his naming ceremony when Caius Caesar, jokingly, chose the name Nero after Claudius, then little regarded. Nero lost his father at 3, inherited a portion of the estate that was seized, and lived in poverty with tutors. After Claudius became emperor, Nero recovered his inheritance and rose in favor through his mother's influence. Rumors swirled of assassination attempts by Messalina, Claudius's wife, thwarted by a serpent's sudden appearance. As a boy, Nero performed with courage in the Trojan play during the Circensian Games. At 11, Claudius adopted him and placed him under Seneca's tutoring. Seneca dreamed he was teaching Nero before the adoption, a prophecy that proved true. Nero showed cruelty early, attempting to discredit his brother Britannicus and betraying his aunt in court to please his mother. Entering adult public life, he gave largesse to the people and soldiers, led the Praetorian cohorts in procession, made speeches in Latin and Greek, and held the prefect position during the Latin festival, overseeing important trials despite the emperor's instructions to the contrary. He married Octavia and sponsored games honoring Claudius. At 17, learning of Claudius's death, Nero swiftly accepted power, being proclaimed emperor by soldiers and publicly acclaimed in the Senate. He refused only the title of father of the country, due to his youth. His reign began with grand honors for Claudius. He organized a magnificent funeral and declared him a god. He also honored his own father publicly while leaving government affairs to his mother, whom he frequently accompanied in public. He founded a veteran colony at Antium, built a large harbor, and relocated wealthy centurions there. Claiming to govern in Augustus's model, Nero showed generosity by reducing burdensome taxes and giving money to the people. He supported impoverished senators with annual stipends and provided free corn to the Praetorian Guard. He expressed frustration with justice, lamenting his literacy and personally greeting many people by name. When praised for good governance, he retorted that he deserved no compliments yet. Nero performed publicly, reciting his own verses, which became so popular that prayers were made for him to the gods, and his writings were dedicated in gold to Jupiter Capitolinus. Nero offered grand spectacles, the Juvenalia, Circensian Games, theatrical plays, and gladiator shows. He even allowed senators and elderly matrons to perform in the Juvenalia. During the Circensian Games, camel-drawn chariot races were held. He established the Maximi Games to celebrate the empire's eternity, with many senators and knights taking part. Among the entertainments, an elephant-born Roman knight descended onto the stage. A play called The Fire featured a house set ablaze on stage, and prizes ranging from poultry to estates were given away in daily lotteries. He watched these games from the front of the stage. In his specially built wooden amphitheater, gladiators were not killed, including condemned criminals, and many senators and knights participated as fighters. Supposedly, entertainers and nobles also faced wild beasts. Nero presented a naval battle using seawater and real large fish and awarded freedom to youths who performed a Pyrrhic dance. During one such event, a bull-covered Pasiphae, concealed in a wooden cow statue, according to the spectators. Icarus, attempting to fly, fell near the emperor, splattering him with blood. Nero rarely presided at these games officially. Instead, he often relaxed on a couch, first behind narrow openings, later openly on a platform. Nero introduced the Neronia festival, inspired by Greek contests in music, wrestling, and horse racing every 5 years. Upon dedicating his bath and gymnasium, he gifted oil to the Senate and equestrian order. Judges for these contests included men of consular rank chosen by lot. Nero personally received crowns for excellence in Latin prose, verse, and harp performance, which he respectfully dedicated to Augustus's statue. During gymnastic games in the Septa, preparing for a great sacrifice, he shaved his beard for the first time, placing it in a gold casket decorated with pearls, dedicating it to Jupiter Capitolinus. He also invited the Vestal virgins to watch wrestlers, recalling a privilege from the Olympic Games. One notable event was the arrival of Tiridates, king of Armenia, invited to Rome by Nero's generous promises. Though bad weather delayed the public display, Nero soon presented Tiridates in the Forum, surrounded by soldiers, dressed triumphantly. When Tiridates approached, he threw himself at Nero's feet but was raised and kissed by the emperor. Nero then crowned him in response to the king's request, while a praetorian announced Tiridates' respectful speech in Latin. The king was escorted to the theater, seated at Nero's right hand, and hailed by the crowd as emperor. Nero sent his laurel crown to the Capitol and symbolically closed the Temple of Janus, signaling peace across the empire. Nero held the consulship 4 times. His first term lasted 2 months, the second and fourth 6 months and 4 months respectively, and the third and another term were held consecutively, with some years between. In justice, Nero seldom gave immediate verdicts, instead delivering written decisions the next day. He didn't allow delays in cases and read his advisors' opinions privately before ruling as he saw fit. He resisted admitting sons of freedmen to the Senate, expelling those admitted by earlier rulers from public offices. He gave military commands to hopeful candidates to soothe their disappointment and typically appointed consuls for 6 months. If a consul died just before January 1st, he refused to replace him, disliking previous brief consulships. He limited triumphal honors to those of quaestorian rank or equestrians, sometimes disregarding military merit. He often had consuls read Senate addresses he sent. Nero innovated city planning by ordering piazzas built before all houses in the streets to help prevent fires from spreading, funding this himself. He planned to extend the city walls to Ostia and bring sea water via canal into the city. He passed strict regulations, including a sumptuary law limiting public feasts and restricting victualling houses to selling only pulses and herbs, forbidding meat sales. He also severely punished Christians, seen as followers of a new and impious superstition. He banned charioteers' revels, ending their long-tolerated license to cheat and steal. Rival theater supporters and actors were banished. To prevent forgery, a new method was introduced. Documents were pierced with holes, run through thrice with a thread and sealed. Wills had to present the first 2 pages blank except for the testator's name, and no one drafting a will could leave legacies to themselves. Advocates were paid reasonable fees by clients, but courts were free, funded publicly. Cases once judged by Treasury officials were moved to ordinary courts, with appeals made to the Senate. Nero never aspired to expand the empire's borders. In fact, he considered withdrawing troops from Britain but feared it would diminish his father's glory. His military actions were limited to reducing Pontus and the Alpine region into provinces after their rulers died. Nero undertook only 2 foreign expeditions in his reign, one to Alexandria, and the other to Achaia. Yet, he abandoned the Alexandria campaign on the very day set for departure, deterred by ominous signs and the dangers of the voyage. While visiting the temples, he once sat in the temple of Vesta. When he tried to rise, the hem of his robe caught, and suddenly his eyesight dimmed so severely he could barely see a few feet ahead. In Achaia, Nero attempted to cut through the isthmus. Encouraging his Praetorian guards in a speech, he gave the signal with a trumpet blast, broke ground with a spade, and carried a basket of earth on his shoulders. He also planned an expedition to the Caspian Mountains, forming a new legion from tall Italian recruits, which he named the Phalanx of Alexander the Great. Some of these actions were commendable or at least uncontroversial, but they stand apart from the scandalous and criminal behavior that soon followed. From youth, Nero was trained in various liberal arts, including music. Soon after becoming emperor, he summoned Terpnus, a renowned harpist of the day. He spent several evenings with him after supper, listening and practicing gradually. To preserve his voice, he went to great lengths, lying on his back with a lead sheet on his chest, cleansing his stomach with vomits and enemas, and avoiding foods that harmed his voice. Encouraged by his progress, though his voice was naturally weak and faint, Nero longed to perform publicly. He often repeated a Greek proverb that no one values music they have never heard. His first public performance was in Naples. Even when an earthquake struck and the theater shook, he continued until the piece was finished. Over several days, he performed repeatedly with only brief rests. He grew impatient with privacy, moving from the bath directly to the theater. Dining in the orchestra among the crowds, he promised the audience in Greek that after a drink, he would offer a tune to make their ears tingle. Pleased by songs sung in his praise by Alexandrians arriving with the fleet, Nero invited more singers from Alexandria to join him. He also selected over 5,000 strong young men from the equestrian class and common people, trained to provide various types of applause, called bombai, imbrices, and teste, whenever he performed. These groups were well-dressed and groomed, often ringed on their left hands, with leaders earning salaries. Back in Rome, proud of his singing, Nero ordered the Neronia Games held earlier than scheduled. Everyone clamored to hear his heavenly voice. He told them he would soon perform in the gardens and, encouraged by the soldiers, agreed wholeheartedly. He entered the musical competition with his name among the contenders. Accompanied by the Praetorian cohort prefects bearing his harp, he took the stage. After a prelude, he commanded Cluvius Rufus, a consul, to announce that he would sing the story of Niobe. He sang late into the night but postponed awarding the crown to perform again the following year, giving himself more chances to appear publicly. Impatient, he performed frequently during this interval, even appearing at privately organized spectacles. One praetor offered him 1,000,000 sesterces to perform. Nero also sang tragedies wearing masks, sculpted to resemble himself or any woman he loved. Among his roles were Cannae in Labor, Orestes the Matricide, Oedipus Blinded, and Hercules Mad. During one performance, a guard, seeing Nero in chains and prison garb as required, rushed to his aid. Nero had an extravagant passion for horses from childhood and constantly spoke of chariot races, though forbidden. He lamented the downfall of a green team charioteer being dragged behind his chariot, joking to tutors that he was actually talking about Hector. Early in his reign, he amused himself with ivory chariot models drawn by 4 horses on tables. He attended minor circus events furtively at first, then openly, pushing to double the prizes and extend race durations. Party leaders refused to appear for less than the full day. Eventually, Nero took up public chariot driving. After practicing privately in gardens among slaves and others, he performed openly in Circus Maximus, where a freedman dropped the signal napkin during his run. Desiring more attention, he traveled to Achaia mainly to showcase his skills. Cities famous for musical contests sent him their crowns, which he graciously accepted, hosting the deputies and singing for them at supper. At Cassiopea, he gave his first musical performance before the altar of Jupiter Cassius. Nero then appeared at all public games across Greece, even consolidating contests from different years into one. At Olympia, breaking tradition, he arranged public musical performances. When news arrived from Rome demanding his return, he wrote that though everyone hoped he would come back quickly, it was more important that he returned with a worthy character. During his performances, no one could leave the theater under any pretext, to the point that some women gave birth there. Many spectators, exhausted by his endless singing and unable to leave due to gates being closed, sneaked out secretly or feigned death to be carried away. Nero entered these competitions with fierce intent, watching competitors closely, privately slandering them or even insulting them in coarse language. If rivals outperformed him, he sometimes bribed judges. Before starting, he respectfully addressed judges, saying he had done all preparations but left the outcome to fortune, urging wise men to judge fairly. He followed contest rules strictly, never spitting or wiping sweat except with his sleeve. Once, during a tragedy, he dropped his scepter and panicked, fearing disqualification until reassured by a fellow actor that the audience's cheers masked the mistake. Whenever he won, Nero himself announced the prize and entered the arena with heralds. To erase any rivals, he ordered statues and portraits of former victors destroyed and thrown into the sewers. In chariot races, he drove with different numbers of horses, even 10 at the Olympics, though he mocked such extravagance in a poem. He was thrown from his chariot but remounted, unable to finish yet nonetheless crowned the winner. On leaving Greece, he declared the province free and granted judges Roman citizenship and generous gifts, proclaiming these acts from the stadium during the Isthmian Games. Returning to Naples, where his public career began, Nero entered in a chariot drawn by white horses, breaking through the city wall as victors in the Greek games did. The same grand entrances marked his arrival in Antium, Alba, and Rome. In Rome, he rode in the chariot once used by Augustus in triumph, wearing a purple tunic and a cloak adorned with gold stars. On his head was the crown from Olympia. In his right hand, the prize from the Parthian Games. Others were carried before him with inscriptions noting their origins, plays, or performances. A loudly cheering procession followed, proclaiming themselves his attendants and soldiers of his triumph. He had the Circus Maximus archway dismantled to pass through the breach, then marched through the Velabrum and Forum to the Palatine Hill and the Temple of Apollo. Throughout, victims were sacrificed, streets were strewn with saffron, and birds, garlands, and sweets scattered. Nero hung sacred crowns around his chambers and bed, erected statues of himself as a harpist, and minted coins bearing his image in that guise. From this point, to protect his voice, he communicated to soldiers via messages or through intermediaries and never spoke publicly without a voice coach nearby, who cautioned him and covered his mouth if he strained. He offered friendship or declared enmity based on how lavishly his audiences applauded. Initially, Nero practiced petulance, lewdness, luxury, greed, and cruelty in private, as if youthful folly. Yet, the world believed these were his true nature. After dark, he disguised himself in taverns, roaming streets for mischief. He assaulted passers-by, wounding those who resisted, even throwing them into sewers. He broke into shops to steal, auctioning the loot in his home. Such raids often cost him near blindness or death, one time nearly beaten to death by a senator for mishandling his wife. Following this, he no longer ventured out at night without tribunes trailing him. By day, he traveled incognito to the theater in a litter, sitting atop the proscenium where he stirred disputes during performances. When fights broke out and stones or broken benches flew, Nero threw them back into the crowd and once fractured a praetor's skull. As his vices grew, he dropped his tricks and disguise, committing vast crimes openly. His revels stretched from noon to midnight, aided by warm baths and snow-cooled ones in summer. He often dined publicly in the Naumachia, Campus Martius, or Circus Maximus, served by common prostitutes and Syrian entertainers. When traveling the Tiber or Gulf of Baiae, brothels and eating houses lined the shore, with matrons beckoning him ashore as if they were hostesses. He frequently invited himself to lavish dinners where millions of sesterces were spent on garlands and roses. Nero's orgies extended to abuses of free-born youths and married women, and he even raped Rubria, a Vestal virgin. He nearly married Act, his freedwoman, after falsifying oaths about her royal descent. He castrated a boy named Sporus to transform him into a woman, later marrying him with full rites, complete with a rose-colored veil and a grand wedding. Sporus was paraded at festivals and fairs, dressed as an empress, kissed publicly, and carried in a litter. Many believed Nero harbored an incestuous desire for his mother but feared her control would trap him, especially after he introduced a concubine said to resemble Agrippina. Nero degraded himself profoundly, inventing horrific games in the arena where, disguised in wild beast skins, he forcibly assaulted bound men and women. After these brutal acts, he concluded performances embracing his freedman Doryphorus, to whom he was married like Sporus, mimicking virgins' cries. It was widely believed that Nero thought no man could be truly chaste, only those skilled at hiding their vices. To those who confessed their unnatural lusts openly, he pardoned all other crimes. He viewed wealth only as something to be lavishly squandered, praising those who wasted fortunes as noble and generous, while condemning those who practiced restraint. He admired his uncle Caius most for quickly depleting Tiberius's vast treasury. Nero's extravagance was boundless. He spent 800,000 sesterces daily on tiridates and gave the king over 1,000,000 upon departure. He gifted estates and homes to favorites, including musicians and gladiators, and richly rewarded a usurer with funerals only princes surpassed. He never wore the same clothes twice and once gambled 400,000 sesterces on a single dice throw. He fished with golden nets pulled by silk cords of purple and scarlet, never traveling with fewer than 1,000 baggage carts. His mules were shod with silver. His drivers wore scarlet jackets of the finest cloth. He was always escorted by footmen and splendidly adorned horsemen with bracelets. In nothing was Nero more extravagant than in his building projects. He completed his palace by extending it from the Palatine to the Esquiline Hill. Initially called simply the Passage, after it burned down and was rebuilt, it became known as the Golden House. To give a sense of its scale, the porch was so tall it housed a colossal statue of Nero himself, standing 120 feet high. The palace grounds included triple porticos stretching a mile in length and a lake as vast as a sea, surrounded by buildings resembling a city. Inside were cornfields, vineyards, pastures, and woods filled with countless wild and tame animals. Some parts of the palace were entirely covered in gold, decorated with jewels and mother-of-pearl. His banquet halls were vaulted, with ivory-inlaid ceilings that revolved and scattered flowers while channels released perfumes onto guests. The main dining room was circular and perpetually rotated day and night, emulating the movement of the stars. The baths were supplied with water from both the sea and the Albula River. When this magnificent palace was finally dedicated, Nero's only comment was, "Now I have a house fit for a man." He also began constructing a pond to collect all the hot springs from Baiae, planning an enclosed gallery conduit from Misenum to Lake Avernus. Additionally, he envisioned a canal stretching 160 miles from Avernus to Ostia, wide enough to allow 2 5-rowed ships to pass. To carry out these grand designs, he ordered that prisoners from across the empire be brought to Italy. Even the worst criminals were consigned to this labor in lieu of other punishments. Nero was driven to such wild extravagance not only by the empire's wealth but also by promises of a great hidden treasure. A Roman knight claimed that Queen Dido had brought vast riches from Tyre to Africa, still hidden in deep caverns, recoverable with some effort. Disappointed by this hope, Nero found himself in dire financial straits, delaying payment to troops and veterans. To solve his money problems, he turned to false accusations and plunder. First, he ordered that freedmen who bore a family name without sufficient cause would forfeit half, instead of 3/4, of their estate to the treasury upon death. Estates of those who neglected the emperor in their wills were confiscated. Lawyers who drafted such wills faced heavy fines. He decreed that any words or actions on which an informer could base a charge were treated as treason. He demanded reimbursement for the crowns the Greek cities had ever offered him during solemn games. Nero forbade the use of amethyst and Tyrian purple, but then secretly sold small amounts on market day, only to shut down merchants' shops claiming his law had been broken. Once, while performing in the theater, he spotted a married woman wearing prohibited purple. He pointed her out, and she was dragged from her seat, stripped of her clothes and her property. Before appointing anyone to office, Nero warned them, "You know what I want, let us ensure no one owns anything." Eventually, he plundered temples of their rich offerings, melting down gold and silver statues, including those of the household gods, which were later restored by Galba. Nero's first act of murder was that of Claudius himself. Though not the mastermind, he was involved in the plot and openly joked about it. He praised mushrooms as food for the gods, referring to Claudius's poisoning. His disrespect extended to mocking Claudius's decrees as the work of a foolish old man and giving him only a modest tomb enclosure. Nero tried to poison his stepbrother Britannicus out of jealousy, envying his sweet voice and fearing the people's respect for Claudius's memory. He employed a woman named Locusta, experienced in poisoning. When the first attempt only caused a purge, he beat her, accusing her of giving an antidote instead. Forced, she prepared a stronger poison, tested first on a kid and then a pig. The final dose was secretly administered to Britannicus during supper. He collapsed after tasting it, while Nero pretended it was a seizure. Britannicus was buried hastily during a storm the next day. Locusta was pardoned, rewarded with a large estate, and given apprentices to train in her deadly craft. Nero's mother, once critical and corrective of him, soon became the target of his resentment. He attempted to turn public opinion against her by pretending to seek retirement to Rhodes. He stripped her of power, removed her guard, banned her from his palace and company, and sent agents to harass and verbally abuse her both in Rome and in her secluded retreat. Fearing her fierce spirit, Nero attempted to kill her 3 times with poison. When these failed, he devised traps to collapse the floor above her bed at night. That failed too. Finally, he built a ship designed to break apart and drown her or crush her cabin. Under the guise of reconciliation, he invited her to Baiae. Secret orders were given to commanders to ram her ship at sea, disguised as an accident. He waited anxiously for news, but she survived, swimming to safety. The freedman who brought this news was given a dagger by Nero and charged with attempting to assassinate the emperor on his mother's behalf. The freedman was imprisoned, and Nero spread false reports that his mother had committed suicide to avoid punishment. Other gruesome tales include Nero's callous inspection of her corpse, where he noted flaws and praised some features, even asking for a drink while doing so. Despite public praise and messages from the army and Senate, he was haunted by guilt, tormented by visions of his mother's ghost and the Furies' torches and whips. He even resorted to magic rites hoping to appease her spirit. When in Greece, he avoided the Eleusinian mysteries, where the impure are barred by the herald's voice. Nero also murdered his aunt. She once affectionately remarked she wished to live until seeing him shave his beard for the first time before dying content. Nero mocked the comment, ordered her to be purged with harsh medicines, and seized her estate before her death, destroying her will to claim all for himself. Besides Octavia, Nero married Poppaea Sabina, whose father had been quaestor, and who had previously married a Roman knight. After her, he wed Statilia Messalina, a great-granddaughter of Taurus, consul twice and triumphator. To acquire Statilia, Nero killed her husband, Consul Atticus Vestinus. He grew tired of Octavia, cut off intimacy, and when criticized, said she should be content with her title. Failing in repeated attempts to strangle her, he divorced Octavia for barrenness. Public disapproval forced him to banish her. He then had her executed on a fabricated adultery charge, suborning his tutor to testify falsely. 12 days after the divorce, Nero married Poppaea, whom he loved dearly but eventually killed with a kick while pregnant because she scolded him for returning late from chariot driving. Their daughter, Claudia Augusta, died in infancy. No one linked to Nero escaped his cruelty. He killed Antonia, Claudius's daughter, after she refused to marry him, accusing her falsely of conspiracy. Others related by blood or marriage were destroyed. He compelled Aulus Plotinus to submit to his unnatural lust, then had him executed, mocking that his mother could now kiss such a defiled successor. He ordered his stepson Rufinus Crispinus drowned for playing emperor in childhood. Nero banished his nurse's son Tuscus for daring to bathe in public baths built for Nero's arrival. He forced his tutor Seneca to commit suicide, despite solemn promises of loyalty. Praetorian prefect Burrhus was poisoned after seeking treatment for a throat swelling. Wealthy freedmen who had helped him rise were systematically eliminated by poison. Nero showed little mercy to anyone outside his family. A bright star, thought to signal disaster for rulers, appeared several nights. Nero, advised by astrologer Babylas that sacrificing nobles could avert doom, planned to exterminate Rome's elite. 2 conspiracies, one by Piso in Rome and another by Vinicius in Beneventum, gave him pretext. Conspirators faced harsh trials, with some confessing out of despair or twisted loyalty. Their children were exiled, then poisoned or starved. Some families and their servants were poisoned at a single dinner, while others were denied sustenance. From that time, Nero butchered indiscriminately on whim or flimsy accusations. Salvidianus Orfitus was charged for renting taverns to cities for deputies. Cassius Longinus, a blind lawyer, was accused of keeping a bust of Caius Cassius, Caesar's assassin, among his ancestors. Paetus Thrasea was targeted for his gloomy appearance, likened to a schoolmaster. Nero gave condemned men only an hour to die and sent doctors to hasten their deaths if they lingered. An Egyptian with an appetite for raw flesh reportedly found Nero eager to feed him with captured victims. Proud of his crimes, Nero claimed no ruler before him understood the extent of his power. He hinted he would exterminate the Senate entirely, handing provinces and armies to knights and freedmen. He never returned customary greetings or kisses in public, and during a public event for the Isthmus Canal, he prayed aloud only for his and Rome's benefit, ignoring the Senate. Nero showed no mercy even for the Roman people or capital. When someone quoted a Greek line about the earth burning after their death, Nero responded, "No, let it burn while I live." He set fire to Rome openly, destroying old buildings and narrow streets. Even consular officers caught his servants with torches but dared not intervene. He coveted granaries near his golden house so much that these stone buildings were battered with siege engines and burned. The fire raged for 6 days and 7 nights, forcing residents to seek shelter in tombs and monuments. Many grand homes of famous generals and decoration from past wars, as well as revered temples vowed by ancient kings and from Punic and Gallic wars, were reduced to ashes. Nero watched the destruction from Maecenas' tower, delighted by the flame's beauty, and sang a poem about Troy's fall dressed in stage costume. To exploit the disaster, Nero promised to clear rubble and remove bodies at his expense, forbidding anyone else from touching the wreckage. Yet, instead of helping, he imposed heavy contributions on provinces and individuals until their resources were nearly drained. In nothing was Nero more extravagant than in his building projects. He finished his palace by extending it from the Palatine to the Esquiline Hill. At first, it was called the Passage, but after it burned down and was rebuilt, it became known as the Golden House. To give a sense of its vastness, the porch held a colossal statue of Nero himself, towering 120 feet tall. The palace grounds included triple porticos stretching a mile and a lake as large as a sea, surrounded by buildings resembling a city. Within its area were cornfields, vineyards, pastures, and woods filled with numerous wild and tame animals. Parts of the palace gleamed with gold and were decorated with jewels and mother-of-pearl. The banquet halls had vaulted ceilings inlaid with ivory that revolved and scattered flowers. Pipes released perfumes onto guests. The main dining room was circular and constantly rotated day and night, mimicking the movement of celestial bodies. The baths were supplied with water from the sea and the Albula River. When the palace was dedicated, Nero said only, "Now I have a house fit for a man." He began creating a pond to hold the hot springs from Baiae, planning a covered conduit from Misenum to Lake Avernus. He also envisioned a 160-mile canal from Avernus to Ostia, wide enough for 2 5-banked ships to pass. For these projects, he ordered prisoners from all over the empire to be brought to Italy and forced even the worst criminals to work on them. Nero's extravagance was fueled not only by the empire's wealth but by hopes of a vast hidden treasure Queen Dido had brought to Africa upon fleeing Tyre. A Roman knight assured him it was still buried in deep caverns and could be recovered. Disappointed by this, Nero soon faced severe financial difficulties, delaying pay for his troops and veterans. To raise funds, he resorted to false accusations and plunder. He ordered that freedmen who bore a family name without cause must surrender half, not just 3/4, of their estates to the treasury at death. Estates of those who forgot the prince in their wills were confiscated, and lawyers who drew such wills were fined. Any words or actions that could be used by informers were deemed treason. He demanded repayment for crowns offered him by Greek cities. Banning amethyst and Tyrian purple, Nero secretly sold some, then closed merchants' shops claiming his rules were broken. Once, while performing, he spotted a married woman in forbidden purple and had her dragged out, stripped and deprived of her property. Before appointing anyone, he warned, "You know what I want, let no one have anything of their own." He plundered temples of their treasures, melting gold and silver statues, including household gods, which were later restored by Galba. Nero's first murder was that of Claudius. Though not the mastermind, he was involved and openly joked about it, praising mushrooms, the poison used, as food for the gods. He mocked Claudius's decrees as folly and gave him a modest tomb. Out of envy and fear of Britannicus's voice and public favor, Nero tried to poison him. He employed Locusta, a notorious poisoner. When the first dose barely acted, Nero beat her until she prepared a stronger poison, tested on animals before Britannicus was poisoned during supper. Nero feigned ignorance, blaming a fit. Britannicus was buried hastily amidst storms. Locusta was pardoned, rewarded with land, and taught apprentices in her deadly art. Nero's mother, once critical of him, soon became his enemy. He sought to turn public opinion against her by feigning retirement plans. He stripped her of power, banished her from his company and palace, and hired men to harass her with lawsuits and insults. Fearing her strength, Nero tried 3 times to poison her. When that failed, he rigged her bed's floor to collapse, then built a ship designed to sink or crush her cabin. Under the pretense of reconciliation, he invited her to Baiae. The ship was attacked by his own men, but she survived by swimming to shore. Nero imprisoned her freedmen, blamed her for an assassination plot, and spread rumors she had taken her own life. He callously inspected her corpse, noting flaws and praising features, even asking for a drink during the ordeal. Despite official praise, Nero was haunted by guilt, tormented by visions of his mother's ghost and the Furies. He performed magic rites hoping to appease her spirit and avoided sacred Greek mysteries while in Greece. He murdered his aunt after dismissing her affectionate wish to see him shave his beard before death. Nero mocked the comment, intensified her illness, seized her estate before she died, and suppressed her will to claim everything. Besides Octavia, Nero married Poppaea Sabina, daughter of a quaestor and former wife of a knight, and after her, Statilia Messalina, great-granddaughter of a twice consul and triumphator. To marry Statilia, Nero killed her husband, then consul Atticus Vestinus. He grew tired of Octavia, ending their intimacy, saying she should be satisfied with his title as her husband. Failing to strangle her, he divorced her for barrenness. Public disapproval forced her banishment. Later, he had her executed on a false adultery charge, fabricating testimony through his tutor. 12 days after divorcing Octavia, Nero married Poppaea, whom he loved but later killed with a kick while she was pregnant because she reproached his late return from chariot driving. Their infant daughter died young. No one close to Nero escaped his cruelty. He killed Antonia, Claudius's daughter, for refusing marriage. He destroyed relatives by blood or marriage, forcing Aulus Plotinus to submit to immoral acts before executing him. His stepson Rufinus Crispinus was drowned for childish pretensions to power. He banished Tuscus, his nurse's son, for bathing in new baths awaiting Nero's arrival. His tutor Seneca was forced to commit suicide, despite oaths of loyalty. The Praetorian prefect Burrhus was poisoned after seeking treatment. Rich freedmen who backed Nero's rise were dispatched with poisoned food and drink. Nero showed no mercy beyond his family. A bright star, thought to portend disaster for rulers, appeared repeatedly. Advised by astrologer Babylas, Nero believed he must sacrifice Rome's elite to avert doom. 2 conspiracies, one by Piso in Rome and another by Vinicius in Beneventum, provided a pretext. Conspirators were tried under harsh conditions. Some confessed, others claimed to be doing Nero a favor by ending his troubles. Their children were exiled, poisoned, or starved. Some families and servants died together at a single poisoned feast. Others denied food. From then on, Nero slaughtered indiscriminately on whim or flimsy pretext. Among his victims, Salvidianus Orfitus was accused for renting taverns to foreign deputies, Cassius Longinus for keeping a bust of Caesar's assassin, and Paetus Thrasea for his gloomy appearance. Condemned were given only an hour to die, with doctors employed to hasten death if needed. An Egyptian man noted for eating raw flesh reportedly found Nero eager to supply him living victims. Proud of his crimes, Nero claimed no prior ruler knew such power. He hinted at wiping out the Senate and entrusting provinces to knights and freedmen. He never observed formal greetings or salutes. At the Isthmus Canal opening, he prayed only for his and Rome's fortune, ignoring the Senate. Nero showed no mercy even to Rome's people. When someone quoted a Greek line about fire devouring the earth after death, Nero responded, "No, let it burn while I live." He set fire to the city openly, destroying old buildings and winding streets. Even consular officials caught his household servants with torches but dared not interfere. He coveted granaries near his golden house, battering these stone buildings with siege engines before setting them ablaze. For 6 days and 7 nights, the fire raged, forcing many Romans to shelter among tombs and monuments. Countless grand homes, formerly those of renowned generals, along with temples vowed by ancient kings and from past wars, were consumed by flames. Nero watched the destruction from Maecenas' tower, delighted by the fire's beauty, and sang a poem on Troy's ruin dressed as a tragic actor. To profit, he promised to clear debris and remove bodies at his cost, forbidding others to touch the ruins. Instead, he imposed heavy levies on provinces and individuals until their resources were nearly drained. To the terrible and shameful disasters brought upon the people by Nero, misfortunes struck from beyond his control. A devastating plague killed no fewer than 30,000 within a single autumn, according to records from the Temple of Libitina. Britain suffered greatly, losing 2 of its main Roman towns to plunder, and both Roman troops and allies faced dreadful losses. The Eastern army met a humiliating defeat in Armenia, where Roman legions were forced to pass under the yoke, an ancient mark of disgrace, and Syria was barely retained. Remarkably, Nero bore none of these calamities with as much patience as he did the scornful insults and lampoons that spread throughout Rome. No group did he treat more kindly than those who mocked him. Satirical verses, posted openly in the city in both Greek and Latin, lampooned him mercilessly. Some proclaimed, "Nero, Orestes, Alcaeus, the killers of their mothers." Others asked, "Who denies that Nero sprung from great Aeneas? One carried his father through flames, the other destroyed his loving mother." Poems mocked his musical pretensions and foretold doom, with verses imagining Rome becoming a single house, emptying to vi. Yet, Nero made no attempt to punish the authors. When information was presented against some to the Senate, he refused to allow harsh sentences. A cynic philosopher, Isidorus, openly taunted Nero in the street, saying, "You sing of Nauplius's misfortunes well, but you yourself behave badly." A comic actor, Datus, mocked Nero's family tragedies on stage, gestures alluding to the deaths of Claudius and Agrippina. When he finished with the line, "You stand this moment on the brink of Orcus, the god of the underworld," it was clear he meant the Senate's peril. Nero merely banished the player and philosopher, either out of shamelessness or fear that harsher criticism would follow. After nearly 14 years of tyranny, the world at last abandoned Nero. The first revolt came from Gaul, led by Julius Vindex, then governor there. Nero had been warned by astrologers that he would be deserted by all. This prompted his famous remark, "An artist can live in any country," meant to justify his musical pursuits as not only amusement but potential livelihood if he were reduced to private life. Some astrologers promised him dominion over the East or even Jerusalem, but most flatteringly assured him he would regain power. Believing the latter after losing Britain and Armenia, Nero thought he had endured all his fated misfortunes. Consulting the oracle at Delphi, he was told to beware his 73rd year, implying he would not die before then. He interpreted this as a promise of longevity and good fortune. Despite suffering shipwreck losses, he told friends, "The fishes will bring my treasures back." At Naples, news arrived of the Gaulish uprising on the anniversary of his mother's murder. Nero reacted with such indifference that some suspected he welcomed the revolt as an excuse to plunder wealthy provinces legally. He went to the gymnasium to watch wrestlers, delighted. When worse news came at supper, he merely threatened the rebels. For over a week, he ignored letters and gave no orders, burying the crisis in silence. Eventually roused by repeated demands from Vindex, which mocked and scorned him, Nero wrote the Senate, urging them to avenge his and the Republic's wrongs, but excused his absence from the Senate by claiming a cold. What stung Nero most was being called a pitiful harper, and addressed by his family name, Enobarbus. He declared he would drop the adoption name Nero, embracing his lineage name instead. Skipping other accusations as unfounded, he vigorously defended his musical skill, often asking if anyone knew a better musician. But alarmed by ever more dire news from Gaul, he returned in terror to Rome. On the way, his spirits lifted briefly when he saw a monument depicting a Gaul soldier defeated and dragged by the hair, prompting him to leap for joy and thank the heavens. Still, he made no public appeal, instead convening some leading men at his house to discuss the crisis. He spent the day showing them and discoursing on a new water-powered musical instrument he planned to present in the theater, if Vindex permitted. Soon after, news arrived that Galba and Spanish forces declared against him. Nero fainted and lay speechless for a long time, seemingly dead. Upon recovering, he tore his clothes and beat his head, crying out, "It is all over with me." When comforted by his nurse with examples of previous fallen princes, Nero lamented, "I am utterly wretched, losing an empire while still living." Yet his luxury and indifference remained. When good news came from provinces, he sang merry verses mocking the revolt leaders, enjoying the jest. At the theater, he told an applauded actor, "Now I have it my own way since I do not appear on stage." Early in the crisis, Nero plotted monstrous schemes true to his nature, sending new governors and commanders and hiring assassins to kill former officials, massacring exiles and Gauls in Rome, abandoning Gaul to his army's plundering, poisoning the Senate at a feast, burning the city, and releasing wild beasts to prevent people from halting the fire. But despairing of success, he instead removed consuls prematurely, assumed sole consulship himself, as if fate decreed Gaul's conquest only by him. At his palace, he declared that upon arrival in Gaul, he would appear unarmed among the troops, weeping, and sing songs of triumph the next day. Preparing for this campaign, Nero focused on arranging transport for his musical instruments, styling his concubines' hair as men's, and arming them with axes and bucklers. He called the city tribes to enlist, but when no volunteers came, he ordered masters to send their best slaves, including stewards and secretaries. He demanded a fixed tax from all classes, collected 1 year's rent immediately from tenants, and accepted only pure new coin, causing widespread taxpayer refusal. Public hatred grew amid a great corn shortage and another incident. An Alexandrian ship allegedly brought dust for the emperor's wrestlers. The people's rage grew fierce. Satirical notes appeared on his statues. One showed a chariot with a Greek inscription urging Nero to take his race. A bag on another carried the message, "What could I do? Truly, you deserve the sack." Pillars bore mocking inscriptions claiming he woke roosters with his singing. Many called for a vindex at night as a joke or hope. Nero was also haunted by omens, dreams, and signs. He began dreaming only after killing his mother. He dreamt of steering a ship with the rudder torn away, of being dragged by his wife into darkness, swarmed by winged ants, trapped by statues near Pompey's theater, his prized Spanish horse's hindquarters transformed to ape-like features while it neighed. The mausoleum of Augustus opened on its own, calling him by name. The Laras fell during sacrifice preparations. Sporus gave him a ring engraved with the rape of Proserpine. At a great gathering for vows, capital keys could not be found. When Nero read his threat to punish miscreants, the assembly shouted, "You will do it, Augustus." His last sung tragedy was Oedipus in exile. While repeating the line, "Wife, mother, father, force me to my end," he fell. News arrived that more provinces had revolted. Nero, enraged, tore letters at dinner, overturned his table, and smashed prized cups bearing Homer's verses. Taking a dose of poison from Locusta, he went to the Servilian gardens and sent a trusted freedman to Ostia to prepare a fleet. He tried to enlist Praetorian officers to flee with him. Some refused. One audibly asked, "Is it so miserable to die?" Torn between surrendering to Galba, fleeing to Parthia, or begging the people for pardon on the rostra, Nero found himself too afraid to act, fearing he'd be torn apart. He delayed his choice until midnight, when guards had left his chamber. Gathering friends, all shut their doors to him. Even his bedding and poison box were stolen. He sought Spicillus, a gladiator, for help but found none, lamenting, "Have I no friend or foe?" Then he ran toward the Tiber as if to jump. Calming, he sought a private refuge. His freedman Phaon offered his country house 4 miles outside Rome. Nero fled barefoot in a soiled cloak, accompanied by only 4 attendants, including Sporus. Struck by an earthquake and lightning that blinded him, he heard soldiers nearby shouting for Galba and passing travelers speaking of his pursuit. He was recognized by a discharged soldier who greeted him. Traveling through brambles and rushes, attendants spread cloaks for Nero to walk on. He refused to hide underground, saying, "I will not go alive beneath the earth." Finally admitted through a hole, he crawled inside and lay on a poor pallet, hungry and thirsty though he refused coarse bread. He drank some warm water. Surrounded by those urging him to save himself, Nero had a pit dug before his eyes, lined with marble if possible, and gathered wood and water for his funeral pyre. Weeping, he declared, "What an artist is about to perish!" Letters delivered by a servant announced he was declared an enemy by the Senate and sought for punishment. Inquiring, he learned the punishment was to be stripped naked, scourged to death with his neck in a forked stake. Terrified, he grasped 2 daggers, testing the points, but put them away, saying, "The moment is not yet." At times, he begged Sporus to start lamentations or set an example by dying first. Then he reproached himself for cowardice, urging courage. As soldiers approached, Nero recited a verse expressing dread. "The noise of swift-heeled steeds assails my ears." He then stabbed himself in the throat, aided by his secretary, Epaphroditus. A centurion burst in, applying a cloak to the wound, pretending to aid him, but Nero responded only, "'Tis too late. And is this your loyalty?" He died with wild, staring eyes, terrifying witnesses. Nero had requested no one take his head, only that his body be entirely burned, a wish granted by Icelus, Galba's freedman, recently freed from prison at the start of the upheaval. Nero's funeral expenses totaled 200,000 sesterces. The bed on which his body was carried to the pyre was covered with the white robes, interwoven with gold, he had worn on the previous January 1st. His nurses, Ecloge and Alexandra, along with his concubine Act, laid his remains in the tomb of the Domitii family, located atop the hill of the gardens and visible from the Campus Martius. The tomb contained a porphyry coffin beneath a marble altar of Luna, enclosed by a wall built with stone brought from Thassos. In stature, Nero was a bit shorter than average. His skin was rough and spotted. His hair tended toward yellow. His features were more pleasing than handsome. His eyes were gray and dull, his neck thick, belly prominent, with slender legs and a sound constitution. Despite a life of extreme luxury, he suffered only 3 minor illnesses over 14 years, none severe enough to stop his wine drinking or change his diet. Nero was careless about his dress and appearance, wearing his hair in stacked rings, growing it long in the back while in Achaia. He often appeared in public in loose dining clothes, with a handkerchief around his neck and without a belt or shoes. As a boy, he was taught the basics of nearly all liberal arts. But his mother discouraged philosophy study as unfitting for a future emperor, and his tutor Seneca kept him from studying ancient orators to secure his loyalty. Nero had a talent for poetry, composing verses with ease and pleasure. Contrary to some beliefs, he did not pass off others' works as his own. Several of his handwritten poems survive, marking genuine compositions, with blotting and corrections evident. He also loved drawing, painting, and casting plaster statues. Above all, he craved popularity, envying anyone who received public acclaim. After winning crowns for his stage performances, it was widely believed he would soon compete as a wrestler at the Olympic Games. He constantly practiced wrestling, sitting on the ground in stadiums as an umpire might, and dragged stray wrestlers back to the center himself. Claiming musical talent like Apollo and chariot skills like the sun, Nero also dreamed of imitating Hercules. It is said a lion was prepared for him to kill in the amphitheater, either with a club or by strangling naked before the crowd. Near the end of his life, Nero vowed that if his power was restored, his spectacles would include organs, flutes, and bagpipes. On the last day, he promised to perform as Turnus in Virgil's play. Some say he killed the actor Paris as a dangerous rival. Desperate to immortalize his name, Nero renamed months and places after himself, changing April to Neronius and planning to rename Rome Neropolis. He scorned all religious rites except those dedicated to the Syrian goddess, though he eventually showed such disrespect that he urinated on her statue. He clung stubbornly to a superstition about a small image of a girl given by a plebeian as protection against plots. Believing in her power after discovering a conspiracy, he worshipped the image, offering 3 daily sacrifices and claiming divine revelations from it. Months before his death, he performed an Etruscan sacrifice with ill omens. Nero died at 32 years old, coincidentally on the same day he had executed Octavia. The people celebrated wildly, running through the streets wearing caps. Yet some continued to honor his tomb with flowers and images, even publishing proclamations as if he were still alive and would return to punish his enemies. Parthian king Vologesus sent ambassadors urging the Senate to honor Nero's memory. 20 years later, a man of low birth claiming to be Nero received strong support among the Parthians, only given up with difficulty. Though no law governed imperial succession, hereditary transfer was implied through adoption. Britannicus, Claudius's son, was the natural heir but was supplanted through his stepmother Agrippina's schemes to secure the throne for Nero. Since Augustus, new emperors had begun their reign winning popularity, though all later degenerated. Whether this was a careful strategy or preserved virtue is unclear. Yet few could be excused from early depravity, perhaps except Claudius. Tiberius's cruelty was known to his mother Livia. Caligula's was obvious from infancy. Seneca recognized Nero's wickedness early. Yet even Nero's reign began with some approval. Unlike past emperors, Nero was deeply corrupted by favorites who encouraged his follies and vices for their gain. Among these was Tigellinus, who eventually met a deserved fate. The reigns following Augustus showed cruelty and horror, but Nero stands out for the especially monstrous act of orchestrating his mother's death. Julia Agrippina, daughter of Germanicus and wife of Domitius Aenobarbus, bore Nero. Widowed after Messalina's death, she pursued an incestuous alliance with her uncle Claudius, competing with Lalia Paulina. Supported by rival factions, Agrippina won favor through influence with Claudius's advisors and was officially married to him in the palace. Whether driven by ambition alone or to secure Nero's succession, Agrippina poisoned Claudius. She also plotted to kill L. Silanus and succeeded in poisoning his brother Junius Silanus. Agrippina was naturally gifted yet was ruthless, violent, and power-hungry, sacrificing virtue for power or pleasure. Though resembling Livia in ambition, she surpassed her in a son's ingratitude and parricide. She is said to have left memoirs used by Tacitus for his annals. Meanwhile, Britain's conquest continued under Suetonius Paulinus, tasked with reducing fierce resistance. Targeting the island of Mona, Anglesey, the stronghold of the Druids and superstition, he faced defenders wielding both arms and religious terror. Women and Druids formed wild assemblies with flaming torches, unleashing terrifying cries that struck the Romans with fear. Suetonius rallied his troops to attack, defeating them in battle and burning the Druids in their own sacred fires, while destroying sacred groves and altars. Hopeful of quickly subduing the Britons, Suetonius left. Boadicea, queen of the Iceni and insulted by Roman tribunes, rallied forces driving Romans from their settlements, including a flourishing London. Suetonius rushed back but deemed the city's defense too risky. London was burned, and 70,000 Romans and foreigners mercilessly slaughtered as the Britons demanded total Roman withdrawal. Suetonius avenged this at a decisive victory, killing 80,000 Britons. Boadicea, refusing capture by the conquerors, took poison. Suetonius was recalled, replaced by Petronius Turpilianus, then by Trebellius Maximus and Vettius Belanus, who favored conciliatory governance over conquest. During these events in Britain, Nero flaunted his extravagance, racing chariots, performing on stage, reveling with prostitutes openly, and committing violent acts by night. His reign became a ceaseless scene of lewdness, cruelty, and folly. Tacitus rightly notes Nero sought to destroy virtue itself after murdering many illustrious Romans. Among his notorious excesses were horrific cruelties against Christians, inflamed by pagan priests' prejudice. Nero blamed them for burning Rome and subjected them to unparalleled punishments, covered in wild beast skins and torn by dogs, crucified, and burned alive as nighttime torches for his spectacles. He displayed this cruelty in his gardens, turning the circus games into macabre shows lit by flaming Christians. Some were coated with wax and set upright by sharpened stakes, burned alive for entertainment. Suetonius observes that with Nero's death, the Caesar's line ended, a family initially illustrious but since disgraced. The tyrannies of Julius Caesar, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Nero varied but shared extreme lust, luxury, greed, and cruelty. Though Augustus introduced what he thought was the best government form, repeated experience showed Rome was sliding into corruption, civil war, and vulnerability to invaders. Beyond imperial tyranny, patrician greed worsened suffering. Senators, already corrupt in the Republic, deepened abuses under the emperors. Dependent on emperors and deprived of former privileges, they sold justice cheaply. Property became insecure, industry declined, and patriotism faded. In this dark era, only a few writers' works survived. Of these, 2 were executed by Nero's order, and 1 died despairing: Seneca, Petronius Arbiter, and Lucan. Seneca, born about 6 years before Christ, showed early brilliance. His father, a Cordoban man of letters, trained him in rhetoric and philosophy under the age's leading Stoics. Following Pythagorean principles, Seneca abstained from meat until pressured to abandon it. He gained fame as an eloquent speaker, but fearing Caligula's jealousy, sought political office instead, becoming quaestor. Accused of scandalous relations, he was banished to Corsica. Following Claudius's marriage to Agrippina, Seneca returned and was appointed Nero's tutor. As preceptor, he served well but faced charges of introducing Nero to vices. It's more likely Seneca's opposition to Nero's conduct caused his downfall. Enemies accused Seneca of conspiring with Agrippina during Claudius's reign, a claim mainly spread by Suilius, whom Seneca had exiled. Seneca was also charged with amassing wealth and building luxurious homes during his time as Nero's tutor. Anticipating danger, Seneca offered his wealth to Nero and requested retirement, but Nero refused. Seneca then feigned illness and withdrew from public view. When the conspiracy of Piso erupted, involving several leading senators, Natalis, who uncovered the plot, named Seneca as an accomplice. Yet, no solid evidence exists that Seneca knew anything of the scheme. Natalis reported that Piso said he rarely saw Seneca, while Seneca replied that their interests made frequent meetings unwise. Seneca also claimed ill health and said his life depended on Piso's survival. Seizing this chance to eliminate the philosopher fueled by jealousy, Nero ordered Seneca to take his own life. When the messenger arrived, Seneca was dining with his wife Paulina and 2 friends. He greeted the news with philosophical calm and even joy, noting the honor in dying by the hand of one who had murdered friends and his own mother. Seneca requested to dispose of his possessions but was denied. Addressing his weeping friends, he said he could not leave them his wealth but would leave his life as an example of innocence and immortal fame, an example they should imitate. He chastised their tears, urging them to endure fortune's shocks and tyranny's violence. He comforted his wife, who wished to die with him, praising her resolve. Their veins were opened simultaneously, but Nero's order only targeted Seneca, sparing Paulina. Some sources say she welcomed the reprieve. Seneca's bleeding was slow, allowing him a final display of philosophical dignity. He drank poison, which failed, then bathed in warm water to accelerate the bleeding, still without success. Finally, soldiers impatient to fulfill Nero's order suffocated him with steam in a heated room. Seneca died on April 12, in the 65th year of the Christian era, aged 53. His body was privately cremated according to a will made while favored by Nero. Seneca's writings are numerous and varied. His first work, addressed to Novatus, is a 3-book treatise on anger. Describing the passion vividly, He argued against its usefulness, opposing the peripatetics, and advocating restraint with wise counsel. This work echoes Horace's famous lines, Ira furor brevis est, animam rege, ca nisi perit imperat, hunc froenus, hunc tu compes catina. Anger is fitful madness. Reign in your mind, subdue the tyrant or be his slave confined. His next major work is on consolation, addressed to his mother Helvia during his exile, advising fortitude amid change and hardship. He argued that exile's miseries, displacement, poverty, disgrace, were not true evils. Prefixed are epigrams on his banishment. Authorship uncertain. Following this was a consolation to Polybius, a freedman of Claudius, for a bereavement. Though serious and apt, the work also contains encomiums on the imperial servant, likely penned to win recall from exile. Another consolation letter addressed Marcia, daughter of Cremutius Cordus, mourning her father. Seneca urged example-setting to overcome grief. The treatise mixes noble thought with delicate flattery. He then wrote on providence, affirming divine design in the universe's order. Exploring why good men suffer, he defended God's wisdom and goodness with keen argument, aligning with natural religion. His treatise on the tranquility of mind followed exile, containing valuable insights though somewhat disorganized. Another, on the constancy of the wise man, offers moral strength amid hardship, considered one of his finest works. Seneca's two-book discourse on clemency, addressed to Nero early in his reign, praised virtues that could have curbed cruelty, though Nero ignored such counsel. His treatise on the shortness of life, to Paulinus, argues life is not truly short but wasted through idleness and excess. He exhorts purpose and study of wisdom for fulfillment. A discourse on the happy life, to Gallio, defends virtue's harmony with wealth, vindicating Seneca against criticisms of his rich lifestyle with sound reason and heartfelt morality. The final section of this discourse is considered spurious. Next, a treatise on the retirement of the wise man debates Stoic and Epicurean views on public life and withdrawal, advocating engagement for the sake of public and private good. Lastly, a 7-book discourse to Abusius on benefits examines the nature, bestowment, and reception of favors with detailed philosophical rigor. Seneca's Epistles number 124, all moral. His Natural Questions cover 7 books discussing Aristotle and ancient scholars. Other works include a whimsical poem on Caligula's death, 7 persuasive discourses, 5 books of controversies, and 10 of declamation extracts. Despite claims of luxury, Seneca was deeply dedicated to literature, a pursuit reinforced by his long exile in Corsica, which gave him few diversions. Although wealthy and influential, no evidence suggests vicious excess. Charges of luxury came mainly from Nero's dissolute circles and envious rivals, contradicted by Seneca's industrious habits and philosophical esteem. Criticism of Seneca's writings is balanced. His style, more elaborate than Augustan authors, can be sententious but is clear and morally rich, valuing substance over artifice. He neither disrespects predecessors nor pretends doctrinal novelty but wisely draws from past wisdom, making him a valuable, safe guide. Seneca also authored tragedies, Medea, Troas, and Hippolytus. His father wrote Hercules Furens, Thyestes, Agamemnon, and Hercules Aetius. Other tragedies linked with Seneca's circle, Thebes, Oedipus, Octavia, likely belong to others. These dramas are neatly written with plausible plots and characters but lack strong tragic emotion. Petronius was a wealthy Roman knight. Early drawn to literature, he balanced elegance with the indulgences of fashionable life. Under Messalina's influence, the court emphasized pleasure, where Petronius stood out. Seeking variety, he governed Bithynia honorably before Nero named him consul. His proximity fostered intimacy with Nero, whose favor grew as Petronius hosted elegant entertainments. Nicknamed Arbiter Elegantiarum, he guided imperial amusements responsibly, controlling excesses to protect morals and the state. When Nero later succumbed fully to vice under feast-master Tigellinus, Petronius expressed disdain in the satire Satyricon, covertly attacking the court's depravity. Tigellinus plotted Petronius's downfall, accusing him of conspiracy with Piso by suborning slaves to testify falsely. Nero, disgusted with Petronius's principles, ordered his arrest. Refusing to endure unjust punishment, Petronius chose death, opening his veins but closing them to enjoy his friend's company first. He asked for light entertainment, not philosophy. Rejecting court sycophancy, he smashed his gem-encrusted drinking cup to deny Nero's posthumous pleasure and sent the Satyricon as a veiled attack, breaking its seal to avoid its use against others. The Satyricon is a unique Latin work, unparalleled and sometimes doubted. While questioning its intent, evident satire of Nero's court excesses anchors its authenticity. The character Trimalchio, depicting a debauched effeminate man, was a cipher for Nero, who even appeared on medals labeled Trimalchio. The work's strength lies in its whimsical but precise satire, not bitterness. Nero's displeasure at its faithful portrayal of his debauchery was clear. After failing to find a betrayer, Nero banished Cilia, a senator's wife linked to Petronius and his revels. The Satyricon includes elegant poetry, notably on Caesar and Pompey's civil war. Though poetic production waned after Augustus, Roman society maintained poetic pursuits, cultivating spontaneous verses and public recitations supported by a culture of applause, often influenced by intrigue and bribery. These public contests, though intended to refine taste, often debased poetry through crude haste and venality. Amidst gloom, poets like Lucan and Persius emerged. Lucan, Seneca's nephew, was born in Corduba, moving to Rome early. Favored by Nero, he became an augur and quaestor young. He boldly challenged Nero musically, winning over him, provoking Nero's jealousy. Bitter insults followed, pushing Lucan towards Piso's conspiracy. Upon its failure, he was condemned and died opening his veins in a warm bath at just 26, reportedly dying with stoic resolve. Some allege faint-heartedness, but others reject this. Lucan began writing in youth, composing on Hector and Achilles' contest and a poem on Rome's burning. His surviving major work, Pharsalia, covers Caesar and Pompey's civil war across 10 unfinished books. It is criticized for style and complexity but praised for vigor, imagination, and passion. Persius, from Volaterrae, lost his father young and was raised by his mother and sisters. He studied rhetoric and grammar before becoming a student of Stoic philosopher Aeneas Cornutus. Their friendship was so close that Persius left money and books to Cornutus at death. Critics once saw Persius's satires as a single long piece, now divided into 5 or 6. His satires target poets' vanity, youth's neglect of moral study, political folly under Nero, freedom of the wise man, and greed, blending instruction with satire. His verses are spirited, though some passages lose polish due to candid language. Finally, poets Fabricius Veiento, who satirized priests and corrupt senators, and lyric poet Caesius Bassus, praised by Persius, lived in this age. Pomponius Secundus, a triumphator general, also wrote admired tragedies.